I want to be heard. I want to be held. Is an easy thing to respond to. Resulting from Peter Sandhill's various abuses, etc. I think he's finally moved on or whatever, but there were numerous meetings, and I am the only person not invited to any of these meetings. Because to invite me and actually learn about this terrain, one would have to acknowledge the obvious thing that not only is this a high issue, it is High's number one concern, as with all schools, because I didn't learn how to love from Peter Sandhill. I learned how to let lust override reason and respect for the feminine. And that the higher ranking person in social status should have their needs met rather than be of service to the community. Because this is what my teacher that I paid enacted in private while putting on an enormous display in public. And that's what I learned. And that's part of what I disseminated. Not to the degree that Peter did. I didn't charge women to abuse them. I just abused them and thought, well, I'm asking for my 100%. I'm doing this and that, the other. I'm following the protocol, and I'm certainly doing better than Peter is. So what's the big deal? Why are they upset? Why are they scared? They couldn't tell me, and neither could I. It's a horrific legacy. It's as painful to realize that one is abusing as it is to realize one is being abused. And you don't get to process the grief incrementally when it's in a wave of denial. It all hits at once, which is part of, the life-threatening aspect of this. So very briefly, and right after starting High, about 15 years ago, I chose Peter Sandhill as the first facilitator to do work with. Within the first half hour, I see he has an erection. Within the first few minutes of sitting down with him, it's like, what's that? I have an erection. Oh, why? Because I'm sexually attracted to you. This instantly took me out of my frame as an American growing up in the rage and hostility directed towards homosexuality. I'm a homosexual virgin, and I'm learning within the first few minutes that my therapist and High facilitator wants to fuck me. I do my normal mapping. I can't just talk about my reality and directly offend myself. I've got to find out what the map is. So I start digging and exploring. And Peter opens up about his open marriage, about his high agreements, about how we could have sex in a team workshop, about how he thinks I would be great on team. And I'm paying my therapist to navigate. He talks about the fact he would like a homosexual lover. So I'm learning what's good for Peter. And this is the problem with someone with repressed trauma, because here we come into my pattern. My pattern is a sensitive who every time I exerted aggression as a child came close to dying. My pattern is to keep safe at all costs by avoiding conflict. And since the truth cannot be talked about with the abuser and people in the power structure, I've got to navigate and find the map to figure out what rooms are here and there or I don't feel safe, as someone who was lied to constantly and repeatedly by my mother to the present day, in a reality fantasy that doesn't even exist. I've got to feel, when I feel the truth with my mother, I press different buttons and I try and feel, where is she today? Because it doesn't matter what she's saying, it's not real. So I have to find, you're angry about that. Okay, that seems solid. You're scared about that. And so I keep trying to find where's real with Peter. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Pretty soon he wants me to pay him $600 to take MDMA, and he'll take it too. And we'll do it at his house because this is going to be good for my therapy. Now, he doesn't know it because he doesn't ask. But he's reenacting the narcissistic abuse of my childhood trauma. He hasn't asked a single thing about my feelings about homosexuality. He hasn't asked if I'm a homosexual virgin. He hasn't asked about my feelings about prostitution, because if you haven't made the link, if you pay your therapist to have sex with you, you're a John, and your therapist is your prostitute. But it's not quite a prostitute because you're paying your prostitute to have sex with you in the way that is best for them. So what's wrong about this scenario for me? Well, what's wrong is I haven't done a life review and haven't even grappled with trauma. I don't know what it is. I don't know what my sexual and relational abuse contract is with my abuser, because we're great at avoiding that in this culture. I don't know that I have an issue. I haven't learned that there's a gap. See, because mentally, I'm a very mental person. Mentally, I have no problem with homosexuality. But my body explodes around the issue because I've watched the level of hostility and hatred being directed at homosexuality, and I'm terrified of more of that than I already have in my own body being directed at me. Meaning I have to deal with that fear and that terror before I can have a healthy homosexual relationship, even if I wanted that. And then there's the early childhood attachment issue, the phenomena of neither parent being able to bond to me emotionally, and both parents exploding with unregulated hatred and rage, so that they would elicit trauma and then abandon me in it, and elicit trauma and abandon me in it, and I never had companionship. And then because this horror was bigger than they were willing to own, we had to bury all that down behind the delusion that it never happened. And because it wasn't satisfying enough for them just to deny the delusion, they had to bribe me to deny that reality so that they could feel good about themselves. And then the learning disabilities and problems and nightmares and terrors that this elicits by being used systematically by both parents and no one standing up for you. That has to be shifted off the parent to create more and more of an idea that it's all my fault, that I have to own that my poor parents are burdened with my dysfunction as a human being, my learning disabilities, my hyperactivity, my anger, my hostility, my numbness, my this, my that. It's all mine. And it's not my parents. Has nothing to do with them. Because they're good parents and they sent me to Waldorf school and they bought me organic food and they painted a mural on my wall. And that's supposed to matter more than the terror, than the lies, than the shame, than the abuse. And I'm not supposed to pull the lid off that lie and speak about the horror of being buried emotionally alive in a pit so deep in loneliness that it wasn't even okay for me to acknowledge how I felt to myself, because it wasn't okay in our family to lie, and it wasn't okay to tell the truth. So we had to bury the truth and then bury the lie so that we could tell a false truth that was socially acceptable. That's a shitload of burying. And in an insecure emotional relationship with that amount of pain and terror, being invited in to a first homosexual relationship with a paid therapist who's a community leader and a gatekeeper, at odds with his wife's preferences, making me an enemy that I didn't want, without unpacking any of that, facing the new trauma of what is going to happen to me and my body if I turn out to be a homosexual, and asked to enter an open relationship, something I'm uniquely struggle to do because of the attachment dynamic. When you don't have a secure attachment with both parents, you tend to be more clingy or distant. It's hard to navigate that middle terrain. Now you violate and abuse all of this terrain when you clunk around using influence in authority without taking the time to unpack it. You see, you remember that point in chauvinism around getting to the point. Okay, I want to fuck you. When's it going to happen? Get to the point. That's masculine. I can't have an emotional relationship with you if it's not perfectly obvious, if I haven't unpacked the arena in which the majority of your emotions are stored, and understand the language of encoding of those emotions. Why does telling the truth make you feel like you want to die? I see. Does your little boy know that I'm not going to kill you? I may hate you and blame you and block you on the high list, but I'm not going to kill you. Does he know that? No, he doesn't. Well, why doesn't he know it? Well, duh. When you have a culture of this degree of denial, how exactly was he to know that? At Safeway at 4 a.m. when the clerk said, "How you doing?" and then glanced irritatively when you didn't say fine? When were you supposed to figure that out? Working with Ann Watts, who doesn't discover these things any more than Peter Sandhill does? Or the acupuncturist who didn't ask a goddamn thing? Or the Waldorf teacher that sent you down in the cellar and told you you'd be eaten by ghosts if you didn't shut up and stop crying? When did you show up in a class where this could possibly be learned? You see, this is our complicity, our problem as a cult. I'm not talking about me. What I've dealt with is nothing compared to a great majority of our children who are so thick in the denial pattern that you ask them, "How you doing?" They know what to answer. "I'm doing great. My mom's a great person." You're going to get an extra piece of pizza for that when we get home. Good job. You keep those people away from the truth. We don't go there in our family. And neither do you. A great Star Trek episode in which Deanna is approaching the grief of her mother, Roxana, where her sister, who she never knew about, died and fell into a pool. It's in The Next Generation. They do a great job of portraying the amount of grief and despair and helplessness that one has to go through as a defense before someone can really feel their own emotions that they've walled off and partitioned. My mother has never approached that wall and will probably die doing so. She is exhausted by defending that wall. My father died while all this was going down with Hai, in complete and utter denial and terror. My brother was with him, and I tried to see, was there any space for truth in his last few hours of being alive? None whatsoever. I sent him a 45-minute recording, and I told him my truth. It wasn't a pretty truth. Dealing with him was not pretty. The amount of people he hurt over a lifetime, enormous. The amount of pain he was in, enormous. It's the pink elephant in the room that nobody will talk about. And so I talked about it for 45 minutes. And I gave it to my brother in an audio recording so that there's a couple of reasons. The part in me that expects to die for telling the truth has a very hard time doing this in person. Recording, it's a little easier because it's like he's not physically there, he can't kill me. My father listens to the thing. My brother said that he seems very young and small and terrified. And he partitions that away in himself, as he always does, which means he partitions all the small terror that I feel that he induced, like he always does. And then he rewrites reality, like he always does. Last words. Thank you for your nice letter, Dane. Let's ignore all my terror, all my reactions, all the pain you talked about, the suicide. Oh, let's ignore everything. Let's just call it a nice letter. I've loved you unconditionally since the day you were born. Unconditional love apparently means beatings, humiliations, shamings, ignorings, patronizing, using you for humiliation and entertainment in public, suicide, whatever. Unconditional love. Who needs it, right? My father is able to pull that one off. It's better than Peter Sandhill, isn't it, right? Peter Sandhill doesn't even say he loves me unconditionally. He just loves me. Heart is open, wishing goodwill for me, right? Just not enough to tell the truth, not enough to see, not enough to understand, not enough to know, not enough to honor the feminine in himself or the feminine in me, because it's terrifying, because it's partitioned off out of view. Because we don't go there. It's not allowed. It's taboo. When Peter Sandhill, under duress and threat of lawsuit, apologized, it didn't occur to him to give a refund. And this is astounding. He acknowledges spiritual abuse, physical abuse, breaking agreements. Under duress, yes. It's hard to say if it's entirely sincere because obviously someone who understands this would apologize immediately and not do it, let alone wait until he was periodically telling me that he was very clear this had nothing to do with him. The fact that he broke his high agreements, the fact that he violated marital guidelines, the fact that he broke every psychological thing in the book, the fact that he used his psychic powers to perpetuate a profoundly destructive relationship. It wasn't worth a refund. Okay, fine, I did it all. Now can we move on? But don't tell anyone. You don't get to tell anyone. I should get to keep my job. Oh yes, and Ann Watts is right there with Peter. You see, when you're of service, when you're in the authority, you're in the masculine role. And the healthy masculine protects and loves the feminine. Your inner masculine, whose job is to listen to the desires, the feelings, the needs, the soulful song of your inner feminine, and then to work like hell to bring that reality about. Your inner feminine loves the feeling of cashmere, and your masculine is the part that goes out and learns how to make money, get a job, and buys the sweater. The masculine serves and protects the feminine. The teacher serves and protects the student. The parent serves and protects the child. But when Ann Watts rebuffed my suggestion that we need to tell the community about what happened, she didn't do so on the basis of what was good for the community. She said, we think that it would be better for you and better for Peter that no one knows what went down here. Consequently, we're keeping this under wraps as facilitators. We have not even told the staff at the office. Okay, so it's clear my secrecy contracts with my abuser are reactivated. If I want Ann's help, my therapist and my advocate in the past, in more than 5 joint relationships, I've got to keep Ann's secret as well as Peter's secret. Not for the good of the community who we are ethically bound to serve, but for the good of us. Because she didn't ask what was good for me, and she rebuffed my knowledge that the last thing that I need, personally, is to be asked to carry someone else's secret because they don't have the courage and responsibility to own their own shit, and they can't protect their community from their own blind spots and lacks of integrity. I didn't need to carry anyone else's load. I needed to unload the many secrets from my culture, my government, my lovers, my abusers, my family, that I've been asked to hold. Don't tell anyone this. I would be ashamed. Don't tell anyone. Don't write about this. I don't want anyone to know. I know I abused you. I know I did this, that, the other, but please don't tell anyone. Then I can go out and pretend to be a great, cool lover and stuff, and that none of this ever happened. I'll be bright, and I can put on my happy face and be positive and make witty remarks, and people will want to fuck me again. Please don't tell them this happened. You know, and it's so sad. It's so sad. Because when you ask someone to keep a secret, what you're saying is, I've given up on ever being loved as I am. That's not going to happen. If anyone finds out who I really am, it's unlovable. But I think if I have enough practice and opportunity, I can put together a performance that people will believe is me, and I think they'll love that. So the last thing I want is you to see me and tell the truth. In fact, if you looks like you're going to see me, I'm going to back away from you. Because I don't want you to see me, because I know it's unlovable. This is the position my mother is related to me since birth. You don't get to see me, and you don't get to see that you don't see me. And you don't dare tell me any of this, because I don't like and love that part of me, and neither does anyone else. And so it's make the best we can with the fantasy that I can come up with. Because that at least is entertaining to perform and pretend from time to time for my teenage self, who's trying to get over the despair and collapse of my young child. And I'm just never going to get older than that. It's not personal to me. My mother pleads with all the siblings to enter her fantasy and pushes back anything true that they share as they slowly come to consciousness after decades of holding her secrets. The relationship terrain within, well, I've spent time with roughly 100 lovers. What I'm sharing here, I'm sharing for the first time. In 100,000 interactions, I have never been asked to share this. I probably will never be asked in this culture to share this. And yet I think it's the most important thing I've ever shared. And the question is, in a school, in a student base around Into Me You See, why is everyone so uncomfortable? And more importantly, why do people use their fear and discomfort to make sure they never see or are never seen in this domain? Because no one has ever sat me down in my entire life and shared this information voluntarily with me. This information lies strongly in the feminine domain of our psyche as individuals and as a culture. How thick does chauvinism have to be before it is never willingly invited out of the box? My wife, the second woman I dated after exploring the domain of my psyche post-secret, because there's a kind of a gift, a sliver of light around this dynamic with the Human Awareness Institute. Because I was determined to keep their secret again. And I tried every which way to be safe, to establish my belonging, to grapple with a psychedelic session for which Peter Sandhill was my facilitator, the first psychedelic session of my life, a session in which he escalated the dose repeatedly, in which I fell in love with him, in which a romantic relationship was escalated by him while I'm on my first psychedelic session. Before he turned from the strongest promise any human being has ever given me to falling away from the support that I repeatedly asked for and directly requested, leaving me disorganized, terrified, increasingly lonely and sad, as Peter tried to disappear and pretend that nothing had happened, that he hadn't made a single mistake as he tried to transfer his entire inadequacy as a facilitator, as a friend, as a lover, as a father. He played the parental role. After promising to take a stand for my safety, my well-being, like no one had ever promised before. He wasn't even on time for the first therapeutic session. He was being paid $175 an hour to show up for. He wasn't on time. He didn't communicate he was late. And he didn't respond to repeated requests to clarify if he would show up at all. This was the eruption point for me. Jonathan Haidt talks in his great book around emotional intelligence around the elephant being the deep unconscious forces of emotion and the rider being the conscious brain. But when you torment and twist and wrap the legs of an elephant with hot steel over and over again, the conscious mind can no longer control the elephant because the pain escalates to a point where the elephant goes berserk and threatens the rider's sanity and safety. Now, Peter Sandhill induced that phenomena in a way that is stunning. It's remarkable. He induced that phenomena and then blamed it on me and walked away. It's an unspeakable terrain within my psyche. And it is a shame and an abomination that the Human Awareness Institute turned their back on their principles, on their ethics, on their mission statement, on their student, and on themselves. And in so doing, bringing into question the basis of the existence of a tax-free organization, taking money, in this case, to harm and perpetuate abuse on its students in ways that are easily preventable. Now, if someone had crashed into your car and smashed it up with a sledgehammer in a materialistic, rationalistic, capitalist culture, it would be a given that you are an asshole for not paying for the car, and it'd be a police report in a matter of minutes and no big harm done. The car would get replaced or the person would go to jail or whatever. But when we deal with this level of emotional abuse, it is absolutely stunning. The apathy, the fear, and the silence that pervades the space as people deny, cringe, avoid, leaving the abuse survivor to make whatever sense they can of this terrain on their own. I've lost $85,000 in savings. My house got put on hold. My health plummeted to where it became an obstacle course through remember, when this doesn't get dealt with before this event occurring, because working with High and working with other therapists, and whether it's Ann Watts or Barbara Musser or Peter Sandhill or Sarah Sandhill, because it doesn't get addressed, because the professional doesn't know how to deal with it. And the client certainly doesn't. I mean, how is this person who's been rewarded throughout life for secrets and lies going to suddenly know the answer of all those stuff that has been buried? I didn't meet a single woman who could articulate this terrain within the high community. And I was lovers with 30. Now I saw this terrain on their faces. Frozenness, panic, dissociation, numbness, confusion, rapid eye darting, crazy making requests. I want this, then I want this, then I want this, then I want this. Okay, so which is it? I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. So which is it? And this panic. I saw this. But no one could speak about it because it's not in High's curriculum. There is not anything that I'm talking in this entire project that I learned at the Human Awareness Institute. And yet I'm talking about nothing except human awareness. One layer after another of awareness inside my body, in the literature, in the cultural patterns, awareness of our history, awareness of our military protocols, awareness of our school protocols, awareness of our national and different country protocols, awareness of the cues and what gets rewarded by women at our point in history at different points in the world. There is a deep contract of silence and protecting the abuser. And there's only one basis to sustain that deep contract: a misunderstanding of what love is, the idea that somehow I shouldn't be telling Mom's secret. The poor thing, she should be allowed to die in delusion and loneliness like she wants to, with no chance of anyone understanding her. The poor thing, how could you? The poor facilitators, taking money to propagate lies and delusion. I mean, we all want to be lied to. I mean, who are you to ruin this nice little pact where we all get to show up and pretend that all these feelings aren't there and that we're really at choice when we feel frozen and don't know why we did this, but we're at choice. Okay, I'm at choice. You see, you're not at choice when you're dealing in traumatic terrain. And you're dealing with traumatic terrain until you heal the trauma. And you don't heal the trauma at high, and you don't heal it at school, and you don't heal it with lovers at high because they don't know what it is. I mean, it is remarkable reviewing the 30 relationships I had with high women and looking at the trauma symptoms and, oh, here it was, here it was, here it was, here it was. And you know what happened most of the time? If I would say, like, well, why are you falling asleep? Why? What? Wait a minute. No, I brought that up yesterday and you fell asleep. I brought it up today and you fell asleep. Now, yesterday you went to bed at midnight, but tonight it's only 8 p.m. You're already tired? Interesting. Why are you falling asleep when I bring this up? Obvious question. I'm not. So we can talk about this? No. It's bizarre. This vague thing. And with the women, it's a contract. You don't get to fuck me unless you make me feel comfortable. Okay? What would make you feel comfortable? Well, I would like you to rape me. Rape you, eh? Yeah, it's a fantasy I have. I'd like you to rape me. Okay. I'm open to this. It's not really what I had in mind, but I'm open to exploring that. What make you comfortable? Well, don't talk about this. Try and make me laugh. Well, what makes you laugh? Well, you'll have to find out for yourself. Okay, I'll try a few jokes. Well, it seems like what makes you laugh is condescending remarks that make you look dumb. Well, don't say that, but make me laugh. It seems like what makes you comfortable is avoiding everything real. Yes, I love that. Let's get drunk. Is that really what we have to do before you can stand seeing and being seen just a little bit? Well, you're no fun. Do we have to talk about this? Do I have to explain everything to you? Get away. I don't like this. When you don't know what trauma is, you don't know what it is, it is absolutely terrifying. You need help. This book, which I read after every community member, well, I read it after my last high event, and it helped me marry my wife, who was a trauma survivor and a multiple sexual abuse survivor. Without this book, I would have abused her unconsciously, not known it, not been able to take responsibility for, would have blamed her for it like Peter blames me, and would continue my narcissistic pattern of hurting myself and other people and having no idea what I was doing. We come up to this area here, and the area that I'm complicit in this, in retrospect, is feeling into authority figures and what they like and don't like, and trying to make them happy. And being the good chauvinist, of course, I started at age 17. I started my business. I learned about material things first. I broke with chauvinism. I was really disappointed in the obsession about appearance, and so when I saw that people were basically obsessing about my clothes, I started wearing thrift store clothes to see if anyone could pay any attention to me as a human being. Because I figured that the only people who would interact with me if I looked shabby in my clothing would be people who paid attention to my eyes and who I was and what I talked about. Well, unfortunately, I couldn't find the people in our culture who looked beyond clothes, so that strategy simply isolated me. That's a lonely thing to realize, that the only reason you're being interacted with is you look a certain way and that makes other people look good. It's very sad. And it's very true in our culture. It's one of the things I love about Thailand. Thailand is the first place that I've been in the world where I experienced that my feelings and my smile and my emotions and my warmth affects other people more than my intellect, my money, and my appearance. And that is what is sought in me. And so naturally I recovered from the high abuse cycle in Thailand and some in the Philippines. The amount of grief that I still have in my body requires tears that are hard to access, because every time I felt helpless, induced by the sociopathic abuse by my father, in the direction of tears, which he would steer me towards, he would then shame and humiliate me for feeling helpless. He would induce helplessness, and then shame and humiliate me for feeling helpless. And tears were one of the cues that he had succeeded in making me feel weak, i.e. overwhelmed with feminine energy, the grief of being lied to and betrayed and hurt consciously by your protector. It's a very, very, very painful wound. I've learned to play the fool with a lot of people because I learned it makes people much more comfortable than what I have to say. And I don't like being attacked. I unconsciously feel out the things that make people comfortable so that I don't feel like I'm going to die. But in doing so, I also participate in my own loneliness, that I'm still unearthing the truths that I've carried since birth that no one wanted to know, the parts of my soul and spirit that no one wants to see, the hopelessness migrating over from my mother, that since nobody wants to see that beauty, it's hopeless to try and bring it out. I was shamed as a teenager, shamed as a child, feared, ignored, fired by clients for being different, considered unfuckable by lovers. And yet, understanding this domain has led me to marriage, because it's led me to understand my own abusive cycle towards my own inner feminine, and others' abusive cycle towards my inner feminine, and how we have colluded to make the power structures comfortable by betraying who we are in a chauvinistic cult. I want to die because what I find most beautiful in myself, in my heart, my mind, and body, seems to terrify, make uncomfortable, lead to hostility, rage, and trauma, lead to abandonment and betrayal, the people around me. Because I'm offered a half-lie. I'm offered a platter, admittedly a golden platter by my father, since he hates everyone else. It's a little bit of an interesting dance. One of the reasons I dissociated from my father is it was very obvious as a pattern within a few years of leaving the house that I was the only person he talked well of because I would have nothing to do with him. All of my other siblings, who he harassed endlessly and who let him in, he despised and tormented until his death. Because I would have nothing to do with him, he talked well of me. And because I spent 45 minutes telling him uncomfortable truths, he offered the great lie on the golden platter. The illusion of his unconditional love, if I would just shut up and not talk to him again and let him die in delusion. So what's it going to be? The golden platter? The idea that 45 minutes of talking about rage and hurt and pain and abuse and this and that is a nice letter? The idea that beatings and lies and humiliations and more lies and blame and terror and rage is unconditional love and It's a nice bit of language. It's a little bit like Phoenix International School for Peace and Ecology or the Human Awareness Institute. Am I going to a sex cult to participate in the wounding, the traumatization of the feminine and other people? A goat farm for delinquent boys? With a rubbish dump set on fire once a week? Great ecology. Father that loves me unconditionally, but can't even acknowledge that anything went on, let alone apologize for it. Or throw out all the words and look at the pain and the grief and the sadness and the confusion that come when deep problems are coated with language, are spun into illusions, to add yet another layer of loneliness to the dynamic by people who won't look at the truth. I learned from my parents that it wasn't safe to accept their lies because they could get me killed. I had to look at the pattern of behavior. If I ignored everything they said and watched what they did and why and what the rhyme or reason was, there was a good chance I could stay alive and avoid the next shock or trauma. The cost was I couldn't live in the illusion in which I was lucky, in which I was a fantasy, wonderful person who didn't exist, in which my parents never made any mistakes, in which I live in the greatest country of the world, in which everything the facilitators have done for me is out of love and care, which no one ever meant any harm. And I don't think that it's really about me. I don't think anyone, my mother, my father, my teachers, the kindergarten teacher that terrorized me and locked me up in a cellar, the French teacher who banged my hands with the desk, Claude Monet, the Michael Hall Waldorf teacher, who said, "Dane, put your hands on your desk." I did so. She slammed the desk down on my fingers. I felt shame, humiliation, hurt, and loneliness. Then she chided me for not moving my hands. When I complained to my parents, they also said, "Well, I thought you would move your hands." Who doesn't move their hands to defend themselves from an abuser? The person who has learned they could die if they act to defend themselves. When this is repeatedly communicated at a young age, through the physiology of the parent's rage, you create a profound vulnerability that can last into an adulthood. In this reality, an abuser perpetrates and violates the individual. And there's this reflex of anger. And then the protector comes in and says, "I've got to protect you by supporting your abuser so they won't kill you." And you say, "That doesn't make sense. This is wrong. I've got to stand up for myself." And the response in the body is preparing to die. And it's confusing. Why am I going to die for standing up for myself? there's no answer, because the entire dynamic occurred in the secrecy of perfect parents who would never do anything like this, who have been championed and protected by all of the adults in the entire culture. And if I'm honest, and I look at you and you and you, I don't pretend that you're somehow better than my parents. I don't pretend that when I wrote about the abuses by Peter Sandhill to the entire high community, that the hostility that came back to me, several men thought this was the time to tell me what a shitty person I am. Other people said, I don't want to hear about this. Please stop writing about this. Other people said, just forgive. It's the only way. Just let it all go. Pretend it never happened. Go back into your coffin. Pile on the dirt and stop voicing this truth. The vast majority said absolutely nothing. We're not going to stand up for you. We don't want to know. But since we normally reply to pithy and witty and sexy things that you say, but not this, be aware that your social ranking has gone down because you had the audacity to tell the truth in a cult of lies where we're not interested in what you have to say. We're interested in perpetuating our facade, where we're scared to confront our abusers, and so we're scared to confront yours. What we're talking about is the transference of shame from the culture to the individual. What we're talking about is, I've done de facto, meaning I have a pattern analyzer inside me, so I've done de facto anthropological studies to see what do people like. I've written over 100 articles and published 10 books. People don't like these deep emotional terrains. And yet, with the Me Too movement, there's a little thawing. It's a delicate balance, because as a man, I've been trained to abuse women since birth, because I've been trained to abuse the feminine in me since birth. By having it abused, ignored, violated, shamed, humiliated, ignored, violated, and silenced, to a point where I've been asked to participate in that self-neglect, to a point where that has become habitual, to a point where that part feels completely worthless, terrified, lonely, and empty, aware that her very existence is hated, ignored, and lowers my status to a point where I hate her as well for emerging in a way that destroys my social ranking. An oppressive dynamic that I participate in to survive, a lonely dynamic that she has no one but the deities in meditation, the deities in dreams, the truths in visions, the joy in crystals, and the love of my wife, to take some measure of a stand for her existence, for her to even acknowledge that she exists in the dark room, out of view, unwanted, hated, despised. She's afraid to show her face. Because she cannot lie. Because she speaks a truth that cannot be bought or manipulated, only silenced. And although the top bit of that truth is bitter, with hate, with lies, with despair, the fountain of energy below it is exuberant, is filled with life. And yet that is the fountain that is pushed down to protect the secrets of the abuser. People who want to die want to protect the feelings of their abuser, which they have correlated with their own survival. At a time when those truths are beginning to erupt, and there is the sense that I will be hated by my abuser. And one of the reasons highs negation in defining love, because Peter has always coated his fear and his ignorance with his love for me. Much like my father's unconditional love. He surely did a better, we're going to rank. Peter's got a ways to go before he can reach that level of delusion. I take great pity on my mother, on my father, to some extent for Peter Sandhill. Terrified children, traumatized children, pockets of emotion unable to be dealt with. I think a lot of Peter Sandhill's mistakes come from arrogance and the default chauvinism of the culture. Now, he may have fought me every step of the way about knowing certain things, but certainly if I could have talked in this way, I think it would have gotten through, and maybe Peter would have run before he began, or maybe he would have opened, I don't know. But when one learns that one can die from telling direct truths, you have to feel your way gently in and notice which abuser lets you go a little bit further and which starts getting angry. One of the reasons therapy has not been terribly effective for me in many situations is I quickly learn the undeveloped, unconscious, and uncomfortable terrain in my therapist. And I understand that they're not going to like me if I take them into that domain by going and doing my own work there. And so I make my therapist comfortable so they'll like me. Because when you were hated as a child, The need to feel love and belonging is intense. And a therapist, however crude and incompetent, is one of the few people who can stand to see something enough so that the love is relevant. People project lies on me constantly. There's never once been a person who has assumed they knew a lot about me within a few minutes, who has spoken because I've asked them, tell me what you see in me. Tell me why you think I said that. Tell me why you think I said no. Tell me why you think I did this. And I listen. There's never been a person who tells a narrative remotely like the narrative in my own mind. Because I know exactly why I did this and did this for this reason and this reason and this reason, and they're not very common reasons. When I wore shabby clothes to see if anyone could see the essence of a human being behind the clothes, there was not a single person who said, what a great idea, or why are you shabby clothes? They all knew why I did that. They knew I was a loser. They knew that I wasn't worth talking to, and that was the end of that. I was avoided. When I make this video now, how many of you understand the rationale and the logic that leads to a decision to make this video? How many think you know and will never ask? When someone shines a mirror on a pattern, on a spread of data that involves every single one of us, there is an underlying truth. And the underlying truth is that the pattern cannot exist without the participation, actively or passively, of every single part of the pattern. And if you understand what the pattern is, and if you get out of the blame game, and you understand your role, active and passive, you have the power to respond and affect the pattern. And if you have a value hierarchy that you can articulate, perhaps embracing some rendition of Plato's beauty, truth, and goodness ideal, your action or inaction or upped action can pivot the pattern closer to something worthwhile. You just have to decide whether your strategy is to protect your abuser, because this is a god-awful thing to marginalize. You can push this out. You can do so many things to deny this truth if you want to. The easiest one is just being too busy to watch it, right? Simple. I don't have time to know myself. I'm running a rat race designed by my advertisers, for whom I prostitute myself to give them money. Every single person can pivot things, but the easiest place to pivot this from is the masculine position. For those of us in authority, with influence, to take steps. Partner, I'd like you to read this book on trauma, shame, and chauvinism. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, and I'd like to talk with you about it. Partner, I'd like to read this book together on the science of trust by John Gottman. I'd like to read this book together. I'd like to talk about this. I'd like to remember our dreams about this. I'd like to do an art together like this. I'd like to have a conversation like this. And if you want to join this circle and speak and share these truths, maybe you'd like to write me an email. Dane@happinessdata.org. D-A-N-E. Maybe you'd like to make me an email and honor some part of your soul, some part of your secret. And tell me how I can honor you in that place. So that you can practice having a real relationship. Because as long as she's buried, it's not really you. It's only part of you. And I've had many relationships with American women. And I say that because there are distinct differences between Danish women, American women, Italian women, British women, Filipino women, and Thai women that I observe on a statistical basis. I'm not talking about you. I'm not boxing you in. If you know what the archetype is for the current modern American women, you have a choice to rebel against it. If not, it will be your reference point by default. And you will apologize for tears and emotion like most. You will strive to grow your masculine traits for social ranking like most. Or if you don't, you will feel bad about yourself because you're more feminine than you are masculine. Like most. Every baby has the potential of expressing the full range of masculine and feminine energy. There is a tremendous amount of grace in that point. Truths of this nature are painful, and yet they are liberating. I have more energy at the end of this project than I did at the beginning because it takes so much energy to push parts of myself down day after day after day after day so that the people who are afraid of who I am can rest easier, confident that I will not speak the truths they do not want to hear. There's a whole new world out there. On the other side of the wall, on the other side of lies. I love that album, by the way, by Pink Floyd, The Wall. It's a great metaphor for this burial and eruption. I want to encourage and invite you to explore this terrain with language, to practice speaking it, if only to an empty camera, a phone, to talk to that person talking back at you, to let them know that they're worth it, that you see who they are, and that you love what you see. However much it terrified your lover, your mother, your therapist, your teacher, your government, there's no threat in your feminine grace. The world is a safer place because you show up in it. And I honor you for erupting from the grave again to speak your truth to me. I thought we could close with a little song to shift the energy and move things along. As I say, part of our cult is an obsession with the masculine, with language. Oh, eh, oh, oh, eh, oh, eh, oh, la la, oh, la la, oh, la la, ya, oh, oh, eh, oh, eh, oh, eh, oh, oh la ba da dia ba oh la 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 oh la da 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 dum bam la da 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 dum da 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 oh la 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 hey ya la ah ah set me free from these chains, set me free, lift me from the grave, from those who buried me. La da 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 dum. La 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 la.